quick polling questions. First, I'd like to know how many people here are students at RIT? Okay, so a good amount of you, a little more than half probably. How many of you are alumni, or alumnosaurus rexes? Cool. And then how many people, and these are not mutually exclusive, how many people consider themselves a designer or identify as a designer? Okay. How many people identify as a programmer? Cool. And how many people identify as an artist? Cool. How many people identify as an audio guy or a girl? Sorry. How many people identify as a producer? Cool. Okay, so we got a nice mix, and I'm sure I left out a lot of things there. There's so many roles in game development, but looks like we have a good mix, and most of you identify as a designer. Hopefully all of you, regardless of your role, understand the role of design and understand that everyone contributes in some way to the design of a game. So why don't I get this set up so I can actually do the presentation. I thought I could multitask. I'm not very good at it. But yeah, like BC mentioned, I am Rohit Crasta, and I work for Funkitron. I'm a producer slash designer slash programmer hybrid. I don't really know how that happened, but that's what I do. So it's kind of great. Being in a small company means you get to wear lots of hats. Sometimes it's hard to juggle those things, but I enjoy the challenge. Is this working? Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm Raw. Oh, that's weird. Display, help button. Looks like it's coming back. It's not coming back. Could be that this is a little loose. Yeah. Maybe it's kind of loose. Could be like a bending thing. Let me try again. Let me start from scratch.
Yeah. There goes.
Okay. Is it working? Okay, we were working. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. Let's see if this works too. Success. Great. So yeah, I'm Ro. I work for Funkitron. Just to give you a brief background of how I got here, I graduated from RIT in 2013 with a game design degree. I moved back home to New York City, where I got involved in playcrafting. They run events, kind of workshops and play test nights and demo nights, showcases, and all that kind of fun stuff. I was doing that in New York for a while, and they sent me to Boston to continue running events in Boston. I did that for a little while, but then I got my first opportunity at design gig, and I jumped ship and never turned back. And I did a design internship at Demiurge Studios, where I worked on Puzzle and Glory and a little bit of Marvel Puzzle Quest. And then finally I ended up at Funkitron, where I started off as a level designer, then became a designer slash programmer, and now I do all the things. So yeah, that's who I am. I've used prototyping a lot in my career in various forms, sometimes for myself, sometimes for work, sometimes to showcase ideas. And I found it's incredibly useful to just get things down and working and playable. And that's what this whole today is about. So today we're going to cover rapid prototyping. And specifically, I'll do a quick overview of rapid prototyping. What is it? Why do you care? And two, I will share some tips, and that'll be kind of the meat of the talk. And then afterwards, depending on time, we might do some hands-on exercises. We'll see how people are feeling. So yeah, part one, overview. What is rapid prototyping? So one of my favorite quotes or descriptions of game design is from Jesse Schell from Art of the Game Design. He says, game design is the act of deciding what a game should be. And I know that sounds deceptively simple, like there's no way that's all game design is, but I find it's actually really useful because it kind of puts emphasis on the decision-making aspect of design. And it also puts the role in the context of the entire team. When you are an artist and you are deciding what colors your characters should be, when you're deciding the colors of your UI, and you're trying to figure out how to frame it in a way that draws the player's eye, you are making game design decisions. Same if you're a programmer, and same if you are in any other role, including audio and production. So everyone contributes to design because everyone contributes to decision making about how their game should be. So that's something I want to put up front. Kind of implied by that is that a game designer's role is specifically to make informed decisions. So it's their job to get the information so that they can make informed decisions and help the team as a whole make informed decisions. So here are some common designer tools that let them do that. And these are not all of them by any means, but just some. First is, of course, research. So a designer might research lots of other games. Maybe you're already working in a specific genre and you want to research games to get a sense of what else is out there. You're researching history, you're researching all sorts of things, you're researching psychology, but all these things will inform your design. You are writing lots of documentation. This is kind of one of the most commonly associated things with a designer. They write docs, they record, flesh out, clarify, present, share ideas. Documentation is primarily used for communication, and that's super important to do that documentation. Today's focus is, of course, prototyping, which is information from trial and error. And then finally, playtesting, where you show your prototypes to people and they play it and you get information from their experiences and from their feedback. So if you think of it, these are all designer tools, but they're also sources of information. So I really wanted to emphasize that prototyping is not necessarily a programmer's skill alone. Prototyping is a designer tool that could be used to get information, and you could be using it early. So I'm sure many of you have seen these diagrams. I've stole them from Professor Schreiber in the back. They're from his class. And one of them is the waterfall diagram. And these are kind of describing what prototyping is in general. So on the left, we have waterfall, which you've all seen, where you start off, you design your whole game out, you implement your whole game, you go into post-production, you solve, fix bugs and tweak, and then you ship the game. And as many of you know, that's a very flawed approach because most of the way down the waterfall, you can find an issue. You can find out your game is not fun in post-production, and then you're in massive trouble because you've used up all these resources. So, these days, most games are developed with an iterative approach, where you start off, you design a smaller chunk of your game, you implement that sooner, you play test it, you evaluate, see where you're at, and then keep going around the cycle. At each point, evaluating and saying, where do I go next? And this is the prototyping process that we want to focus on today. So that's the iterative cycle. That's at the heart of prototyping. So now some fun definitions. So in this case, in the context of this presentation, we're going to call prototypes a sample product that is a representation of the final form. The actual form of the prototype is not important at the moment. Prototyping is as a verb. We're using the iterative cycle from before to create a prototype. Makes sense? And then finally, today, rapid prototyping, which is quickly prototyping, but towards a goal. Types of rapid prototyping. There are two different approaches that I've seen have worked really well. Experimental kind of prototyping versus a more focused approach. The experimental, the iteration is hold on one second. No. Okay. Experimental iteration is more freeform and flexible. So, for example, you could do a spaghetti in the wall style where you just try lots of different things, throw them against the wall, see what sticks, right? And that's a totally valid way of designing, especially if you are a small team, if you are just curious about something, maybe you're by yourself, maybe you're working on a game in class, but you want to also do something on the side. And it's great for open-ended timelines and no budget, right? If you're not on a deadline, this is great. And you should totally do it, especially if you're a student, because you have no reason not to. That being said, often you do have a deadline, and you have a team to manage, and they care about the work they're doing, and you should too. So in that case, focused rapid prototyping is iteration directed towards a specific goal. In this case, you want to prove that a specific idea is fun, or maybe you're solving a specific design problem. But the key is that it's a specific goal, and we'll get more into that later. But this is great for mid to large size team, pretty much anything that's not tiny. And it helps you prioritize your resources and your tasks and your feedback. If you know what your goal is of your prototype, you know what feedback to listen for. You could even direct certain resources to certain features to make sure that those goals get the highlight, the emphasis. But it's really important to emphasize that these are also not mutually exclusive. You can be, even if you're super focused on a goal, you shouldn't be too rigid, because it's very, very likely and possible that you are prototyping and something pops up that you don't expect, and it's very valuable to be able to pivot based on the result of a prototype, because you never know when you might learn from a prototype, which is the idea. And if you're being too rigid, you're kind of missing the benefit of the prototyping. Any questions so far before I keep going? Cool. Okay. So here's some common uses of prototyping. One is the most commonly known, finding the fun. We say you have an idea and you assume it's fun and you prototype to find it. Or sometimes you prototype it, you realize it's not fun, but something else about the prototype interests you, and you follow that instead. Either way, the goal is that you somehow end up at fun, right? And you found it, yay. Next is you're experimenting with risky ideas in a safe context. I want to really emphasize safe there. If you were spending 2 to 3 years making a game and spending all those resources in a full team, you are risking a lot on a risky idea. Whereas if you are rapidly prototyping in a short time frame with limited resources, you can try those risky ideas out, and it's totally safe, because if you mess up, you've only lost a little bit of time, and you've probably learned a lot more than you've lost. So the safe context is really key here. Maybe you are pitching a concept to other people. So it is very common to write up like a concept design doc, and that's also valid. And you might write up a concept design doc or a pitch presentation, like a PowerPoint kind of thing, and you might showcase that to potential publishers and investors and so forth. But often you will want to showcase a prototype because our medium is so interactive, and the truth is that the player, whether it's a publisher, investor, or whoever, won't really get a sense for your vision unless they get to actually play it and feel it themselves. If you can sell them on the vision through gameplay, then they're really going to buy in. Another reason is you're testing the waters for interest. Maybe your idea has a lot of market risk, and you want to see if people are actually interested in your weird, crazy idea. So you do some kind of sneaky focus group play tests. You do some market research. You try and get a feel for, is there interest in this weird idea that I have? And finally, like you mentioned, and we'll get more of this later, you're answering a specific design question. But don't take my word for it. There's many, many well-known games that use rapid prototyping, and some of them are pretty high profile. So this is an early prototype of Braid, and it's particularly well known because he had all the basic time-based mechanics working before he ever showed it to an artist. And the artist is known for saying something along the lines of, when I got the game, everything was working, I barely moved any locations of things, I more or less got a fully working game with all the puzzles in it, which is pretty crazy. That means that he managed to use all of his programmer art to figure out all the design problems and to create lots of cool puzzles based on time manipulation. I don't know, I'm assuming most of you have played Braid. It's kind of hard to see, but that's Nerbacular Drop, which is technically a shipped game, so maybe you can't call it a rapid prototype, but it's most well known for being the proof of concept for Portal, which you've all heard of. And in Nerbacular Drop, they showed the promise, the proof of concept of placing portals on walls. I know it's a little more awkward. You have to kind of drag and place a big hulking mouth. But the promise, they managed to come up with some cool puzzles, even in a short number of levels. And it was enough to get Valve's interest, who ended up hiring the whole team and letting them lead a Portal, which is pretty damn cool. And finally, one of the most recent well-known examples is Breath of the Wild. For those of you who don't know, they actually prototyped their physics and chemistry system using a 2D prototype, which is super duper cool. They decided, you know what, we want to try something a little bit more freeform. Our Zelda games have gotten a little bit more narrow and closed, and we want to try something where players can approach problems in multiple different ways. But they wanted to try that without having to build an entire 3D open world game. So instead, they made a 2D game. And they used what looks a lot like the original Zelda, actually. But they managed to test things like fire burning wood and using water and going on a raft and putting out fires and all those kinds of physics and chemistry interactions that you know so well in the actual Breath of the Wild. And they managed to do it for way cheaper and way quicker. We'll get to this later. That's called a throwaway prototype. So yeah, that's the overview of prototyping. I'd really like to open up to questions if anyone has any before I get into the tips. Any thoughts, questions about anything you saw? No? Okay, cool. So let's get right into the tips. I think what I want to do, I'll take it a little slower starting from here. There's 10 tips, and I want to try my best to apply them to, let's say, 2 prototypes. I'm kind of winging this, so we'll see how it goes. But let's say I have a prototype that I'll show you momentarily that I call it the verb test. Or I call it verb scribble knots, right? And it's just an idea. It's not my best idea. It's just an idea that I prototyped, and I actually kind of like that it's flawed for the sake of this workshop. And then let's look at also the Breath of the Wild prototype that I mentioned. So we'll use these 2, and we'll talk about them and apply the tips and kind of see where things are lining up. Not to compare my thing to Nintendo, it's crazy. But anyway. So tip number 1 for rapid prototyping, start with curiosity. So we're going to kind of go linearly and kind of go from ideation to like a prototype. So the first part of it is coming with ideas. And how do you come with idea? First, you start with something that catches your interest, that you want to learn more about. There's many, many ways to brainstorm ideas, and I won't cover that in this talk because there's whole talks on that. Things like mental mapping and kind of opening up your brains, and often you'll see in a company brainstorming sessions, there's no wrong answer, just throw out ideas and throw them in a map. All those kinds of techniques the whole idea is to open up your brain and let yourself not say no, to consider everything because there's no wrong answer at first. So, but let's assume that you've done a lot of brainstorming. Maybe you're at a game jam and you have a theme, and you want to spend an hour brainstorming, or maybe you want to just go total blue sky. What's possible? There's some common approaches or starting points. One is you could do a bottom-up design. Mechanics are gameplay driven, so that implies that there's some mechanical idea that interests you, right? So maybe it's a twist or a variation on an existing genre. Maybe it's an evolution of a mechanic system that you already love. Maybe it's a new, never before seen mechanic, like a portal or a super hot. Either way, actually the portal example works out really well because in the portal example, they tested out the mechanic and did a proof of concept in Nerbacular Drop, which was themed as this kind of weird Circles of Hell thing. I'm actually not really sure. It was weird. And then when Valve took it, they threw away the theme entirely, said the mechanics are what's cool about this. Let's build an entire game around your mechanics, and they completely rethemed it with GLaDOS and a laboratory and all that kind of really awesome stuff that we now associate with the game. So that's an example of bottom-up design, where you're starting with a mechanic and you're building up the theme. Top-down design is the other direction, of course. You start with a theme or aesthetic. Maybe you have a story that you want to tell. A lot of people who are narrative designers start here, or they consider themselves, they're most excited by the ability of games to tell stories. So naturally, those people will often start with a story that they want to tell. 2 is a feeling you want to capture. I put in web slinging because just to imagine you like that feeling of you're web slinging through New York City, or maybe you like the feeling of Mary Jane being in Spider-Man's arms. Whatever the case is, there's a feeling there, there's an aesthetic, and maybe you want to try and capture it in the game. And that's also a valid starting point. You could start a game with a feeling. Maybe there's a period or event in history that fascinates you. This is the source of many war games. A certain battle is super cool. It's crazy that they were so outnumbered and they managed to do these awesome strategies and come out ahead. And that's what the source of a lot of wargaming, source a lot of other kinds of board games, and of course the source of a lot of shooters and RTSs. But the final thing is, before I get there, let me just mention that these are not also mutually exclusive, like everything I've said. You can start with the bottom and the top and try and put them together. You can start from the bottom, go to the top, and then wiggle back and forth. It's not like a unidirectional thing. It's just rather start with something that interests you and move in every direction you can, if that makes sense. And these are valid approaches, but you can even start right in the middle. One tip, if you are struggling to come up with ideas, add some external constraints. And that might sound backwards, but constraints will typically breed new ideas. Best example I can think of is a game jam. You have a theme that you're supposed to make a game about. You have only 48 hours, which is a crazy constraint. And you maybe even met your teammates today. And it's like, wow, okay, we have 3 programmers and an artist, and we kind of mostly know Unity, but one guy's more of a construct guy. I guess we're making a Unity game. Oh, the theme is lost doorways? Okay, I guess we're, what? And then just kind of like, without even knowing it, you were already on your way to making a game because of all those tight constraints. So when in doubt, add constraints. So that's tip number 1. And actually this is where I'll bring it up here. So the curiosity around Breath of the Wild, there's actually a really cool GDC presentation on it if you haven't seen it. But one of the curiosities, there's kind of 2 things. One was they wanted to go back to the essence of the original Zelda, and they were interested in that level of freedom. That interest of like, when you start on the screen and you can go in any 3 directions, and kind of the world is your oyster. Whereas the more modern games leading up to Breath of the Wild didn't actually do that so much. They were more confined, and they send you on a more linear path across the world. So I will say that one point of curiosity, it's not a game idea, but it's a point of curiosity, is just more freedom. That's really bad handwriting. So more freedom, right? And then another point of curiosity for them was this kind of physics chemistry system. This idea that you have a puzzle and you can solve it in more than one way, which also applies to freedom. But let's just say, let's call it multi-purpose puzzle, or multiple approaches to problem solving, okay? So they were interested in that. And that's really all we have so far at step 1, right? In the case of verb scribblenauts, I had an idea that was like, what if it was scribblenauts but verb-based? So like you're typing commands to perform actions. And that was it. Like that's all I started with. I didn't have a game idea yet. It was just curiosity. Oh, Mike. So that would be, what if, let's say a platformer. So what if controlling a platformer with verbs? Maybe one day after this workshop, I'll translate this into English. So this is kind of your starting point. It's not a game idea, but it's a starting point. And I was interested in that. Blanking on his name, but the director of Breath of the Wild was really interested in these concepts, and he wanted to revisit them in Breath of the Wild. 2, flesh out your idea. So you might be like, wait, we're prototyping. Why am I spending time fleshing out ideas? Should I just jump in? Yeah, in a second. First, once you have that simple thing, develop it into a game concept. And this is this is a really fuzzy line, but let's say an interest is, I'm fascinated by time dilation around a black hole. Like that interests me. It's not a game idea, but I just love that concept. Maybe you just saw Interstellar, or maybe you study black holes, or whatever the reason time dilation interests you. The concept might be, Event Horizon is a tower defense shoot 'em up where you defend a black hole from alien waves while subject to time dilation. So now it's kind of an idea. It's not necessarily a good one, but it's an idea based around time dilation, and you can kind of get a sense of what the gameplay might be. You can use that as a starting point and say, what might that look like? And getting from the point A to point B is not easy. That's where you typically do the brainstorming. Light documentation is super useful here. So this is where I find, being on a plane or a train and being trapped somewhere and I just have ideas randomly. This is where I would jot down ideas as fast as I can and tell myself, by the end of this plane ride, I want to have a decent idea that's fleshed out. So you'd capture ideas while you're excited. Like, don't think, oh, wow, I should be prototyping, so I shouldn't be designing. No, you could still design. You could still flesh out your ideas, and you should. And you definitely should be doing it when you're super excited, because that energy is like the reason you're even here, right? And you can run through thought experiments. It'd be like, I wonder what a certain puzzle might be where, alien waves are coming in from here, and the time dilation is in stages of areas, and I have to, map my units in a way so that they know they're going to be slower here and faster here, and you draw a diagram or something. But, and this is the but, beware of over-designing up front. This is probably one of the biggest mistakes I've seen designers make, where they spend too much time in design land, or pure design land, I should say, and they haven't tested anything. Because if the core of your game is innovative, then you're building all of your design ideas on an unstable foundation. And that's really, really key. I mean, it's one thing to say, I want to make a platformer, and go, then fine. Or something say, I want to tell a story, and you could build out your world Bible, great. But if your idea is something like Super Hot, where it's time only moves when I move, and you're basing all of your puzzle ideas and you're spending hours or weeks designing puzzles based on that idea, and you haven't actually prototyped time only moves when I move, that's really risky, because that foundation is totally unproven. Also, it's easy to get really attached. You've probably heard this as well. You document your ideas, everything just sounds better on paper. Everything sounds better in a diagram and looks better. And when you try in a prototype, you'll quickly find that there's lots of flaws. It'll be better as a result, but this is the danger of over-designing up front, is that you get too attached, and you are probably hitting diminishing returns pretty quickly. Actually, let me show you an example of this. So I don't know if this will break everything. Oh, I didn't. Great. So, yeah. So Tic Tac is an example of a game that I got really excited about. It was, and I won't give you the whole spiel, but essentially it was a mechanic idea based on dual analog movement around zero gravity and all that kind of fun stuff. And it was supposed to be a Metroidvania. And I grew up in Metroidvanias. I love them, blah, blah, blah. But what I did was, I did exactly what I said not to do, which is that I wrote lots and lots of design docs, and I fleshed out 5 different versions of the controls, and I did some more Bible stuff, which actually I don't mind so much. And I flipped out all these mechanics and ideas for weapons and techniques, and essentially all the Metroidvania items that you would see in a Metroidvania, based on a unique idea that hasn't been done before. So it was kind of like, this all really excites me, but 90% of that stuff I wrote might change based on the first prototype. So it's really a waste. So I had to cut myself off and say, it's great that I'm excited. I'll work on it if I'm stuck on a plane again. But otherwise, I better get prototype. So just I'm not immune to that. It's very tempting. Flesh out your idea. Oh no, did I lose it again? It freaks out when I go into PowerPoint. Let's try again. So it shows here, and when I go into PowerPoint, anything? Huh, okay. Well, maybe I'll just do it from here then. Okay. That's not as fun though. Let's see. Sorry guys. Yeah, I might do that. It worked last time. Any questions so far while I'm doing this? Let me try doing this while it's open. Okay, I don't get it, but all good. Okay, so flesh out your idea. Great. Any questions so far? Yeah. There's no right answer. There's no perfect answer, because it is a fuzzy line. But I would say, think the sooner you start prototyping, the better. Especially if your idea is mechanic based. You could probably afford a little more time if it's a theme based idea. So I wish I could tell you an answer in terms of hours or days, but I don't got one. Sorry. But yeah, I would say if you're writing pages and pages and pages of designs, you've probably gone too far. Whereas if you got a 1-page concept or 5 pages with some cool riffs on that idea, that's probably fine. Really, guessing here, though. Okay, tip number 3, set clear goals. What is the purpose of this prototype? So who is your target audience? Is it players, investors, designers? What are you trying to prove? Are you trying to prove the funness of your idea, the market viability? It's really important because the clear goals are going to inform your design decisions, right? For example, what should the scope of this prototype be? Or where should we focus our polish efforts? And we'll get more on tips on how to deal with that later. But essentially, if you know what your goal is, it'll inform these decisions. For example, if you are pitching your concept to potential investors, then polish becomes more important because now you're trying to wow them with some juiciness. Or if you're showing it to players up front and you have, like, for some reason the investors are interested in the player's response, again, polish becomes important. Whereas a scope might be more like a vertical slice for investors. Trying to make a multi-purpose, word should be prototype. Prototype is tough because the goals can, of course, compete with each other. So if you don't know what your goals are, or if you have multiple goals at the same time, you often could go in multiple directions, and then you're kind of building a larger thing that you need to. And as you probably know from all your game development classes, you always want to scope as small as you can. Focus your scope, tip number 4. Oh wait, do I have a thing there? Yeah. Oh, one thing that was helpful here. So in our current game at Funkitron, we'll call it Funky 2. It's due out later this year. We're doing like a tech beta. And you might think, tech beta, oh, it's all technical focused. But actually, our publisher is primarily interested in what's called day 1 retention, which is a mobile term. And what that means is they're interested in the number of people and interest when they come back on the first day after their first day. So essentially, it's the second day. How many people come back as a percentage of the people who enter up front? And that directs our prototyping a lot because it means that we need to put more focus on things that are interesting up front. Our tutorial needs to be really good, which normally you don't do in an early prototype, but it's important here. We need to have a lot of juiciness. We need to show the promise of mechanics, and other things like difficulty and lots of levels and content are not as important because the primary metric that they're using to consider our game successful, our publisher, is day 1 retention. So that focuses our efforts, which is kind of cool. I don't necessarily agree with that goal, but it does help us make decisions, and a lot of tough ones. Tip number 4, focus your scope. So not just scope small. Oh, question, yes?
Yeah, sorry, I was actually just interested just about the anecdote you were giving.
Sure.
About sort of prototyping and talking about things like tutorials.
Mm-hmm.
So since your goal you said was actually sort of like retention and keeping players as they come in, is there any particular parts of first time user experience that you were focusing on, or in terms of like, visually or speed to get gameplay, or is there any particular singular part that you guys try to focus on there to get an effective measure for retention while still having a tutorial in, or?
Yeah, totally. So one is what you said, which is the rate of gameplay. How fast do you get to the fun, quote unquote. There's this kind of inherent idea that tutorials are not fun, so you want to get out of the tutorial into the game. You want to show them that there's more while still giving them the safety of making mistakes. Our game is a little bit of a variant, so it's that comes with its own challenge of teaching. So it's like both A, teaching the concepts that are a little unique, and B, making sure that they find themselves incentivized to go through and get to the fun quicker. Yeah. No problem. Anything else? No? Cool. Focus your scope. So not just scope small, but focus it. So a very traditional thing you've probably seen in game design classes is the Miyamoto pyramid, where you kind of start off, it should be lines here, so imagine a line. But you start off with just your primary mechanics, and you focus on just that and get that honed down, and you try and make it fun with just that. And then your next stage, you add on your secondary mechanics, and they support the core, and so forth and so forth. But the idea being that at every stage, whenever you're adding things, they're always A, supporting the core, your core primary mechanics, and B, every stage is a fun game. Like, theoretically, I wouldn't necessarily say ship it, but the game should be fun enough to be shippable at any one of those stages. That's a very common game design pattern, but I would actually go a step further and say not just the core primary mechanics, but hone in on the risk of your game. And that could be a couple of things. Is there design risk in your idea? Is there technical risk in your idea? Is there market risk in your idea? And instead of saying the core, it might be the same thing. Ask yourself where those risk points are and try to prototype that first. Oh, I forgot about these guys. So, this is actually a good point. So here, let's draw this line. Let's say this is 4, right? So in the case of Breath of the Wild, they've made dozens of Zelda games. They know how to make Zelda games. They know how Link should probably swing his sword. They know how to move around into space. They know how to make puzzles. They sure as hell know how to make puzzles. And they know general adventuring feel. They know general exploration feel. So their goal with their chemistry prototype is not to prove those things, because they already know how to do those things, and they know that Nintendo's team can do that. Instead, their goal of the prototype was to focus on the risk, which is the freedom. Like, do modern gamers actually want freedom? It might sound obvious now, but back then, there was this kind of question of, back then in 1985, or I guess 1986, when 6 or 7, whenever the original Zelda came out, back then people were more willing to lose and try again, and today they don't want none of that. So there's this kind of sense of risk of like, can they take that level of freedom now? Will they get confused and frustrated, or will they enjoy the freedom and the ability to explore? Same way, the physics system. If someone in Breath of the Wild gets up to a puzzle, are they just going to run in and swing their sword? Or are they going to consider all the different possibilities? Are they going to want to try and use the fire and the rain and all the kind of things that can help? Are they going to try and wait to rain and then strike lightning or sneak up on them and all the different options you could do, or make a boulder fall down from a hill? Are players going to care about that, or are they just going to run in and swing their sword? Those are really valid questions, and I don't necessarily know the answer to them. Well, now we do, but at the time they didn't. So they made a prototype to test those specific concepts. So yeah, I'll just write down, willing to explore, question mark, and then, willing to be creative. That's the risk that we're talking about, and that's the risk that they tried to solve with the prototypes. In the Verb Scribblenauts game, same kind of idea. If you're playing a platformer, you're probably interested in fast-paced flow Twitch gameplay. At least many platformers, unless it's like a puzzle platformer. In that case, do you really want to type the word jump to jump, or do you just want to hit the damn button, right? So that's a major risk too, is that maybe this typing idea control is just way too clunky and awkward. So I'm going to put that clunky, just want to play. Is it just too weird? Is it quap? Quap is awesome, but anyway. So your first prototype should focus on that risk as opposed to focusing on all the things that have been proven time and time again by many other games. And I think it's probably a better use of your time. How do you know where the risk is? Well, that's something that comes with experience and lots of playing, but the first thing I would do is ask others for input. Pitch your idea in 1 or 2 sentences, your elevator pitch, so to speak, and ask them and say, what do you think is risky? And they might point out to you, if someone pitched PUBG 20 years ago, they'd been like, "Were you crazy to have that many players online at the same time? That is impossible." And back then it would have been true. But the point being that the technical risk over time has gone down and down and down as servers and internet connections have gone up, and as consoles have, have been able to take on that kind of stuff and included networking into their designs. Or the design risk of something like Pokemon Go, which obviously blindsided everybody, including the developers. But, Pokemon Go, do people actually want to get up off their couch and go outside and catch Pokemon when they could just do it right on their couch, on their 3DS or on their Nintendo or on their Game Boy? So that was a major design risk there. And if you don't know the design risk in your idea, just ask lots of people. Ask your mentors, your peers, and get them to comment on where they think they see design risks. Chances are they'll find it pretty quick. And I mentioned this before, but ideas that have been tried by other games successfully. So maybe there's an idea that another game tried and failed at. That's another form of risk, right? You don't know if you necessarily can do it right. Maybe you believe in it. You said, oh, I believe in that so much, they just did it wrong. An example actually would be like Psionics. They made the game, I can't even say it, supersonic, acrobatic, something cars. Rocket power cars probably. And they made that game and it was not successful. But they loved the idea so much that they still wanted to try it again, and they believed in their own idea despite the lack of success in their own game. And eventually that led to Rocket League, which was a massive success. So I guess there's not really much of a lesson there other than, know the risk and understand that when you're going for something that has not been proven before, it is risky. And your prototype should focus on that. We kind of do this here, but try and break your idea up into questions, because that's a better way to frame it, so that way your prototype can be the answer to those questions. Because if your idea is verb scribble knots typing to jump, that's great. But if your idea is broken up into, is it fun to type a command when that takes longer? Does typing feel clunky rather than fun and flow-like? Yeah. Cool. Any questions so far? Yeah. I mean, assuming it's a lot, I would try to break it up if you can. It might not be easy to. And it might be that you implement one feature and that will answer lots of those questions. So I guess, write the questions on one side and then try and make a comparing list of features and then see, what features might get you what questions. Also, ask your peers again and say, of these questions, which ones are you most concerned about? Which one do you think is the most risky thing? And then that might weed yourself down from 100 questions to 10 to eventually 3. And that's way more manageable, right? Any other questions? Cool. Okay, choose the right tool. Dozens of awesome popular tools. I don't have to tell you guys that. I think most RIT students use Unity, right? That's probably the main tool in RIT. But there's Unreal, there's GameMaker, Construct 3, and at the bottom I just put some guy's paper prototyping. Each has its own strengths and weaknesses. You can research that, I don't have to tell you. But I really want to bring up a point about technical skill. This kind of alludes to my original point, which is that prototyping is for everybody, regardless of your technical skill. It's not required for rapid prototyping. But, if I'm being totally honest, it does empower you a little bit. In the sense that you don't necessarily have to be a programming wizard. You don't even have to like programming. But if you can do a little bit of technical, even if it's not necessarily programming, but if you're able to configure things, if you're feeling comfortable in the Unity editor and configuring objects and tweaking variables and that kind of stuff, that is another form of technical skill. And it's very important for a designer because it lets them get in and try things and iterate fast. Whereas if you're afraid to do that, you don't want to get even open Unity, you are subjecting yourself to telling someone else to try the thing that you tried. You have to wait for them to do it, see them to build. It's just way too slow. And if you want a rapid prototype, you got to be willing to jump in and get your hands dirty. We, in Funkitron, we often look for technical skill in resumes when we're hiring level designers. And it might be like, well, you're making levels, but the truth is that level design is extremely iterative. We happen to also script our levels in Lua, but it's not really scripting. It's actually really, really simple. But you do need to have enough technical ability to understand what debugging is. And that doesn't mean you're a Lua scripter. I don't consider myself a Lua programmer at all. But I can find a problem in my Lua scripted Cascade level and say, okay, I think I know what's happening. I can try things out. And I could be pretty independent in my iteration. And that empowers me to iterate faster and get more fun levels in less time, which is great. If you are intimidated by coding, consider teaming up with a programmer. I'm very surprised by people who, they're afraid of coding, they don't want to get into it themselves, and they just kind of freeze. But you know what? You're surrounded by people who are talented, some of who love to program. So why not just team up with them? Make friends and find someone you trust and be a pair and get some stuff done and make some cool things. And consider paper prototyping, where often it seems like, I thought of an idea for, so some might be hard. The verb script lines might actually be pretty damn hard. But a lot of ideas can be broken down into systems, and you can at very least try out those systems. It does lend itself more towards turn-based games and less twitchy games, but you can still do it. I've seen it done before. And this is the whole point. Kind of throw away the rest of the slide, because the truth is it doesn't actually matter that much. You should just pick something and go. My example of this is that I was one of those people. When I went to RIT, I didn't identify as a coder, and I actually hated it, and I was very averse to it. And I regret that now, but towards the end of school, I had a casual games class. and we made games in JavaScript. And that's the last thing that I would think would be, at least at the time, would be a game making tool. But I kind of got what I was doing at the end of that class. So after I graduated, and I said, I have no portfolio, what do I do? I said, I guess I kind of got that HTML5 JavaScript thing. Maybe I'll just try and make something like that. And I made a game in a weekend, and like it changed my life, where I was able to make something. Didn't matter that it wasn't in one of these tools. I just made something, and I was able to start iterating, and that empowered me to be a designer, and eventually do like a gazillion game jams, which helped a lot. Tip number six, consider the throwaway prototype. Throwaway prototype is a prototype you quickly make with the intention of throwing it away and starting over again from scratch. This is kind of risky, but there's a lot of power to it. The pros, it's lightning fast. You don't care about it being like great coding practice. You just want to jump in and get stuff done. Often you're laser focused. You're just trying to get things done faster. Like I said, it could be less formal. You don't have to go through the formality of writing a design doc. You don't have to do all the right things in your check-ins, which I know sounds like bad practice, but often you just want to get stuff done. Letting yourself be a little freer will let you iterate more quickly. And you can ignore all those really hard problems. So often, and this kind of goes back to the picking a tool thing, people will freeze when they're picking a tool because they're so concerned about the end product, which, you know, is fair. You might say, I really want to make a mobile game, or I really want to make a game that I could ship to all the consoles. And you were concerned about picking the right tool for that job, but you've never made a game before. And part of me is kind of saying, honestly, just pick something and get going. And if you make a prototype with the intention of throwing it away, guess what? You get to throw it away. You don't have to worry about that the tool you picked wasn't the perfect tool for shipping it, because all of it can be thrown away, which is great. So it sounds weird to be like, why would I want to start over? The answer is that if starting over later empowers you to get moving now, then it's worth it. There are cons. Biggest one is that you kind of build like the right prototype, and you kind of get to this like, wow, everything's going super duper fast, and then suddenly you just drop off the diminishing returns. And at some point you hit this breaking point where, oh man, it's like too tangled now. Like I am now reaping the pains of my bad coding practice or whatever. And now it's really hard to get stuff done. I'm putting in new features, and they're breaking other features from before. So you hit this kind of point, and hopefully when you start going down here, you've started your main game already, and you can pick up. That's the ideal, right? Is that you can kind of start your main game, building that foundation, when you've already gotten a lot of love and fun and cool learnings out of your prototype, your throwaway prototype. That way, when you feel like, okay, this prototype is getting harder to work on than it is the main game, you can flip over. That's the ideal. As a note, we didn't have quite that in our new game. So we were prototyping, let's call it Funky 2. We were prototyping it in April to May last year. And the prototyping was very beneficial. Our publishers had two very major concerns. And I'll say that it's based loosely on Cascade. It's not Cascade 2, but it's like a spiritual successor. So it uses some similar kinds of gameplay, and it does core itself in matching. But right off the bat, they said, Cascade is too tough. People don't get Cascade. It's too unique. They just want to match 3 like normal match 3 games. So right off the bat, we normally would never do this first. We built a tutorial back in April for a demo, for a rapid prototype. And that was really weird, but it also was pretty empowering because it let us address that specific concern that they had. Other things is we tried some new mechanics. We tried some key changes around Cascade's core gameplay. And we got to try them out quickly, which is great. But we hit a point in, I want to say fall, where it felt like everything was slower. Because there is a huge cost in switching. At some point, you have to make the real game. And we were building this really cool new Funkitron engine based in Unity, and it was moving, and things were getting built, but now we have to deal with all those hard problems that we weren't before. And now we have to think about things like, this is not just a game, this is a game that is as a service that's meant to be live. Cascade has been live for over 3 years. If this game could be live for that long, we need to not have, and now we're running into problems with Cascade because we didn't think it would last this long. So now we're thinking, okay, this game could be 3 years long, we should build a game that can support that and not have those same problems. But that comes with moving a little bit slower. So there was like a point in fall where kind of the executives were saying, how come it feels like we're going so slow? The prototype was so fast. Why can't we just pull the stuff over from the demo? And we're kind of like, it's not really the same code at all. Sorry. So there is a price, but eventually we got going again, and it was all good. Borrow and reuse. Common game dev problems have already been solved by others. For a throwaway prototype, choose an existing template, borrow code from your older prototypes, even consider stealing art. I'm not suggesting plagiarism, but what I am suggesting is that if you're going to throw it away, it's okay to borrow things and use them and try them out for the sake of learning. Just don't publish it, obviously. If your prototype is focused on what is new, then don't waste precious time on what is known. I'll show you guys the verb test now. Gone a little longer than I expected, sorry, but I'll get moving a little faster. So what I just want to show you is that this is Phaser, and again, I don't really consider myself much of a coder, but Phaser has this really basic platforming prototype, right? And it's pretty crappy, but it lets you teach the basic concepts of Phaser, which is and learning how to use the update loop and learning how to apply gravity and have a little bit of collision and collect objects and you have a goal. And it's a good starting prototype, right? And I wanted to try out Verb Scribblenauts. And it was like a platformer game controlled with a keyboard. And I said, I don't want to recreate a platformer. That will take me a long time. So I just took that prototype and I just built on top of it. I might regret refreshing. Okay, we're good. So you can see that all the same assets. It's based on the prototype, but instead I'm doing input using, using typing, right? So walk, and I have some commands up here that I've shown for reference, and there's the stuff that you would normally do in a platformer, and then some Easter eggs and stuff. But I just wanted to get a feel for, kind of what it might feel like to platform with typing. And it turns out it is pretty damn clunky. So that that risk thing was proven pretty fast. But it was enough for me to still be I kind of like typing. And even though it's clunky 90% of the time, there's a 10% window where I feel like a badass. And I'm interested in exploring that. So my new idea is I'm going to ditch this one, and I'm going to make a fighter where it's two people with two keyboards. And you might be like, wait, how would you ever distribute that? I have no idea. But I just want to see what will happen if two people are fighting each other with keyboards and typing commands for high punch, low punch. And that way the frustration, because one of the biggest problems with this prototype is that it's you versus the game. And the gravity is against your typing. And it's I hate that so much. But in the example of the fighter, you're both sharing in that frustration. And you get to be a little bit more creative and hopefully expressive. I mean, the ideal is a fighter where you have multiple characters. And imagine the language of the typing commands can match the style of your fighter. Imagine you have a guy, an Old English character and all of his, a Shakespearean character and all of his text is in Old English commands. That kind of thing could be a lot of fun to be expressive but still be a fighter. And I don't know if it'll be fun. It might be really weird. But it's the next thing. So we'll see. Okay. REUs. Are we in? Are we dead? Do I have to unplug again? So weird. Any questions? We're almost done. Okay. Cool. REUs. Fail fast. Faster title loops. This is pretty straightforward. I had to put it though because everyone knows it. Fail fast, faster title loops, more learning in less time. Don't be afraid of failure. Failures give you the most information. And your ideas are imperfect anyway. So don't think, oh, I failed, I shouldn't have prototyped. Instead think, thank goodness I prototyped and I found all those flaws that already existed. So the prototyping just reveals the flaws that are already there. And always keep moving. When you're stuck or discouraged, look for a small win and just get something done so you can see a change in your game, and that'll be very motivating. Yeah. Minimum polish. Tip number 9. Polish is a double-edged sword. It's really hard to know how much polish to put in a prototype. The answer is usually not nothing, and the answer is usually not everything. It's always somewhere in the middle, and it depends on your situation. So first, polish some pros if they could draw attention to details of design. If you are focused on, combat gameplay, actually there's a really great talk on combat mechanics and animation. But he talks about how he had to put in animation polish up front to get the game feel of his brawler feeling right. And so you don't normally think of putting a lot of work into animation, but it was so crucial to the game feel, which was so crucial to the game, that he had to put it in up front, and he put in these beautiful animations really early. That's not what Jonathan Blow had to do. So it's interesting, like based on the game, you put different amount of polish. It can help you pitch a concept. We mentioned this before. Investors, players, especially casual gamers, are going to get caught up on a lack of polish. They'll see your game and they'll see the blocks and they'll be like, what is happening? And sometimes you just need a little bit of polish to let them get over that and focus on the gameplay. But of course, first major danger is that it's so freaking time consuming to polish. Polish is not a one-off thing. Polish is infinite. There's no finish line. Finish line is fuzzy, typically. You probably heard these quotes, the last 10% takes 90% of the time. Or another quote I like a lot, games are never finished, they're shipped. And the basic idea around those two quotes is that you can polish your game forever. And many people do try to do that. Sometimes they polish so slowly that they get better faster than they're polishing. And then they decide to start over because they don't like their stuff anymore. You probably saw that with Fez in the indie game, the movie. So you have to make sure that you don't think, I'm going to finish all the polish. Do the minimum amount of polish necessary to get your thing out the door. So then the question becomes, the other thing is that polish can mask flaws in your gameplay, because it's the flip side of the other thing, where, wow, it's polished, I'm really obsessed with that cool, juicy explosion, and you don't get to see that there's serious flaws in your game design. So when polishing, some tips, strive for good enough, and I know that sounds really itchy and bad, especially if you're an artist and you want everything to be beautiful. But the truth is that you just don't have time. You just got to get it to be good enough. Consider a vertical slice. So instead of building the beginning of your game, build level 4 and make it really, really tight, 5 minutes of gameplay or less, and try and get the core of your mechanics. If your game is a fighting brawler game, get in a cool encounter. Throw in some enemies, maybe a boss. Just get them to experience the idea, like the core of what your game is, without having to put in level management systems and player management systems and all that jazz to get them to level 4. Just throw them right in. Plus, being vertical slice, especially if it's narrow, lets you spend a little bit more time on polish than you otherwise could. I like these terms, oiliness over juiciness. So oiliness is the idea of polish that is focused on reducing friction. So that means things like if the colors are distracting, if you made a matching game and you have a bunch of colored orbs, a lot of people will tell you that, especially colorblind people, they have a lot of trouble working with colored matching games because they can't distinguish certain colors from each other. That's a common problem in a lot of games, actually, for colorblind people. So the most common way to deal with that in matching games is that not only is every gem a unique color, it's also a unique shape. So you might not think that you want to spend time on that, but you need to if it's going to get in the way of your playtesters enjoying your game. Other things might be confusing menu options where they don't know where to go, or confusing scenarios where they don't know what to do. That kind of polish is really important. It's the oiliness, because it's going to help reduce the friction and let them focus on what's fun about your game, or what's not fun. Either way, you need to find out, right? Whereas the juiciness is the pizzazz, the big, splashy explosions of fruit when you slice in Fruit Ninja, or the blood gore if you're in that kind of game, or the rev of the engine and the really nice sound effects. All that stuff are great, and they absolutely should come, but they take a back seat when you're after prototyping. The prototyping polish effort should be on the oiliness. Try to set expectations. This is super hard, but just try at least say, you know what, I didn't have time to do any art. It's programmer art, just give it a shot. And it probably won't work, but it doesn't hurt to just say it. You never know. It might help at least let them know, okay, I'm not going to comment on the art. I'm just going to comment on the gameplay. And hopefully that'll work. But good luck. Finally, wait, do I have a thing here? Wait, cool. Number 10, last tip, practice. On an existing project, if you haven't already, start prototyping. Just do it. Pick a tool, go. Have you prototyped the riskiest parts of your design yet? Or are you prototyping things that have already been done, like the verb example? Like if I was spending time making a platformer, I wouldn't be testing my idea. I would just be testing a platformer. We already know that platformers work. Are you hitting diminishing returns? Maybe you just keep trying to make changes in your game and you're not feel like you're getting anywhere. It's probably time to shift direction. Some other ways to practice. I said it again and I'll say it again. Game jams. Just go to game jams. If you haven't done one, do one. If you've done it, do it again. If you've done 10, do 20 more. Just do game jams. It is rapid prototyping in expert mode in a nutshell. You are making games in 48 hours. You have to rapid prototype and have iterations. A good game jammer will have a fun game by Saturday morning and a very fun game by Saturday afternoon. And they just can't wait to show it on Sunday. Like that's your goal, is to have, a working game Saturday morning, a fun game by probably Saturday afternoon, I would say. It sounds ambitious, but that's the pace you have to work at in order to have enough iteration cycles to be, because most of the time, especially if you're starting out, you try and make a game and it all comes together at the last second. And every now and then that works because magic, right? But most of the time you want to have something working Saturday morning. Challenge yourself. This is super hard, but if you're a student, please do this. I'll root for you. Make a game every week, every month. Everyone who's ever done this has come out being a pretty awesome game designer, just because the pure, massive information that comes from making things and trying things and failing over and over again. You just learn so much. So please do this if you can. Even if you're a student, I know you have school projects, just make a bunch of games. Try and make a game for yourself every week or every month. And that's it. That was a lot of information. Thank you so much. That's me. You can follow me on Twitter. I try to be pretty active on the Discord in Rock Game Dev, so you can usually message me there, or find me and tag me, and I'll be happy to chat. Anyone have any questions? We can go deeper now. Yeah. Yeah.
So isn't there like a sort of blurry line between those two as well?
Oh, absolutely.
And I guess how would you determine whether or not like some part of your game is whether for example, like a fighting game and like it feels really bland, but like if there's a screen shape it feels a lot better.
Yeah. It's really, really tough. It depends if you're getting distracted. So like if you're getting distracted, if you feel like the punch is just not feeling good and it's bothering you and you can't focus on fighting, then maybe you're leading on oiliness now and it's not just juice because it's distracting you. So kind of like watch your attention, and not just yours, but the attention of the players, and see what is distracting them, because those are sources of oiliness usually. The other thing, like you said, it's fuzzy. If you imagine like a spectrum rather than like a oiliness or oily or juicy, imagine like a spectrum and just try and start on the oily side and do all the things as far as you can. In professional game development, what will often happen is, when it's done right, the artists and designers and programmers are empowered to go as far as they can. They're incentivized. At the end of the sprint, I don't want to just put the feature in. I want to make the feature feel damn good. So they're going to get it in rough, and then they're going to try and get it in rough sooner so that they have time to polish. And if they have time, they will do some juiciness, because it's not going to necessarily hurt. But they'll start with the oiliness first. So always think of it as like, when you're a member of a team, it's your personal challenge within your sprint to try and get as much juiciness as you can, but you got to get it in first. So you may not have time. You often don't have time, if that makes sense. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
You said high school savvy graduated, but that's what you did with a bunch of game jams.
Yeah.
Is that when things really started cooking for you, or was it like shortly after or before?
Cooking for me. I mean, the benefits, I think that's what caused my break into the industry. It could be a whole talk in itself, but essentially I was a really bad RIT student, like really bad. And I came out of school somehow, and I had no portfolio. And anyone will tell you that is the worst. You need to have a portfolio before you graduate. That's how you get jobs. And I had this kind of like post-graduation crisis of, what do I do? And I made like that first HTML prototype, and I did a bunch of game jams, and it didn't give me benefits right away, but it did give me a bunch of prototypes and a portfolio. And most importantly, it gave me confidence to go around and pretend I was a game developer, and at least fake it until I make it, right? That was kind of the idea, because I had these 7 game jams in 4 months or whatever, and I was able to walk around and show things to people, which was really empowering. And eventually, the first one I made, the Brain and Brawn, which is like an HTML5 sliding puzzle game, got me my design internship. So, I really believe in that kind of thing. So, yeah. The results might not come right away. There's a lot of chance, and as you guys all know, there's a lot of networking and who you know and all that jazz. But at least if you have a portfolio, you were set up for that moment when the stars align and the guy or girl who you want to be talking to is right there and you have something cool to show them. That's the best. You just don't want to be in that situation and not have something to point them at, because that's not going to get you a job. So, yeah. Anything else? Any questions? Yeah. When to abandon an idea? Oh, that's super tough. So if it's different if it's, you're working on a team versus your personal. Obviously, psionics, like there's so many, one-hit examples. Like psionics is perfect. They didn't give them their idea for over 10 years. And then eventually they got a hit at a Rocket League. So it's hard to say that there's one answer. But typically, there's I'll point you guys at a blog post at some point. Maybe I could include it in the slides. There's a great blog post by Dan Cook, who is from Spry Fox Games, and he talks about stage gate design. And his concept is to be building lots of prototypes at once. So you don't necessarily abandon it, you shelve it. Because you have other prototypes that you're also working on that are cooking. So if you're hitting that diminishing return point and you're getting frustrated, especially if it's hurting your motivation, maybe, and it's a personal project, maybe that's a good time to not abandon it, but shelve it, and then do some other cool things, and then down the road, you might have an idea that solves that problem, or a new context. Like the Verb Strogonauts, I haven't touched it in over a year, to be honest. It's something I made over a year ago. It was something that interested me at the time. The next time I touch it, it'll be because John or someone gives me a way to make 2 keyboards, and I could try that out. That'd be a lot of fun. And then I would try a prototype based on that. But it's just like follow your curiosity, right? So, but that's a lot harder to say when you've already put 2 years in the project, right? So, yeah, that's a hard one. I don't think I answered your question.
Kind of a broad question, but when you're prototyping, how much do you think about coming out of that prototype with a tool that you might be able to use elsewhere, or do you just keep everything confined to that prototype?
That sounds really smart. And if you can do that, you should. It probably isn't the most important thing, but in my perfect world, I'm a rapper prototyper who I make a game every week or every month, right? And I have this template of tools that I could just start with every single time, and it just makes it that much faster. So the short answer is that's great. It's not, but if that's going to hold you up from making something, probably don't need to worry about it. And there's no downside to that, unless it's slowing you down. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah. So do you mean in Funkitron, or do you mean for my random indie ideas? Okay, yeah. So to go back to a prototype is really hard. It seems like a mid-development prototype. Okay. What you're working on design-wise? The sooner the better, usually. The sooner you have an idea of how to do it in some form. If you are totally have no idea how to do it. Actually, let's use the verb example. I don't know right now how to do 2 keyboards at once and get input and be able to distinguish between the inputs. And I'm sure there's 7 programmers in here who are that sounds really easy, you're dumb. And that's fine, and I hope you tell me how to do it. But I don't know how to do it, and I know I did a little bit of research, and my stamina for programming and research is pretty low, so I gave up pretty quickly, and I was like, you know what, I don't care that much right now. Either A, down the road I'll care more and I'll push through it, or B, I'll meet up with someone and ask them and they'll tell me the answer. Either way, it's win-win. So, yeah. I guess once I can do it, I do it, is the answer. Yeah?
You were talking about learning technical skills so you don't have to go back and forth to somebody else who's a programmer, slowing you down.
Right.
But is there a thing about team prototyping or pair prototyping? Are there advantages and disadvantages to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I probably should have put an asterisk on that point because you're right. The goal of a designer is not to get the programmer out of the way. The goal of the technical skill is to empower you to help with a prototyping process. So that might mean, in the case of Cascade, for example, we do our levels in Lua, and if a designer was not unwilling to do Lua scripting, they would be pretty darn stuck, and they'd be asking a programmer to help them with that. However, when you need new features, we do have a programmer who programs the new features. So in terms of like getting good chemistry and getting a good flow, and we're thinking in terms of sprints, especially like 2-week sprints and longer, you need to get the programmers involved. There's no way around it. And they're all a part of that process of design a simple idea, implement it, and the truth is that if their passion is programming, they're just going to do it faster than you. So yeah, I mean, totally work with a programmer and lean on them and prototype with them and make them a part of the cycle. But don't let it be because you're lazy. You know, that's what I mean. That's kind of the real message to designers, is that there's a difference between leaning and working and collaborating with a programmer and relying on them because you're unwilling to do any tech work. Or another way to put it is that there's always too much to do for the programmer. So if you learn a little bit of technical skill, you take some of that load off of there. There's a lot of time-consuming things that are actually pretty simple technically. And you want those things to be off the programmer's plate. The programmer can do the harder technical problems that you never want to do. Does that make sense? Does that kind of answer your question? Okay. Anyone else? Questions? No? Cool. Okay, well, thank you so much. At this point, it's a little later than I thought. It's 8:30, yeah. So we have the place until 9. I know, we can break from here and just hang out and talk and eat pizza. Yeah, I know that some people, I'd asked if people wanted to bring ideas, but I think it's a little later than I thought it would be. But if you do have ideas, we should talk about it and try and see if we could solve them together. But I think probably at this point, cut it. It's been almost an hour and a half. Yeah, okay, thank you.
So we were able to capture audio streaming videos.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, totally. Cool.
Great, thanks for coming, everyone. Feel free to hang out. We have a good night. Next week,
Cool. Oh, I do have a question for everyone. Down the road, I took it out of this workshop for a number of reasons, but I would think it might be fun down the road. I did in New York a paper prototyping for digital games workshop, and it was super fun. It was super hands-on. It was actually like 10 minutes of lecture, and then the whole time was actual real hands-on prototyping, which I think sounds like a lot more fun. So would people be down for that down the road, like a paper prototyping for digital games? Yes, thumbs up, cool. Oh yeah, okay, great. So we should totally do that on the road. Like, yeah. No, it was paper prototype for digital games. It was the idea of like making a paper prototype to model an idea that might be a digital game. Does that make sense? So it was really a paper prototyping class, but with a focus on this is a tool that is viable for digital game designers. Don't exclude it like that. It was cool. It was a good workshop. The guy who made Killer Bee, if you guys know him. Sorry, Killer Queen. Killer Bee. Thanks, everyone. Hey. Yeah. It's 10-player arcade game. Competitive 5-on-5.
I have a small prototype for a game and I call it Killer Queen. What is this about?
So it's a 5-on-5. It's 5-on-5 arcade game where each team of 5 takes on different roles. One person's the queen, one person's like the warrior bee.